Ask me this question when you're ever thinking about railroads and abandoned lines. What comes to your mind when you think about railroad tunnels? Well, there are lots of things when thinking about railroad tunnels. Workers and individuals would either be injured or killed while working on them due to rocks or freak accidents, having dark or paranormal origins behind them, making them a haunted legend or just to be abandoned from the get-go, or leaving it to rot for centuries to occur, like in this time period. However, the one thing an individual hasn't thought about a tunnel is whether or not is if the tunnel has a mind of its own. There are lots of tunnels in the United States alone, particularly 153 tunnels to be exact, with most of them being in California and Washington states. Some of them have been restored and used in operable services that serve railroads and road connections, while others in the country were abandoned by their owners or turned into something else, with a few notable examples being preserved in today's society. However, one of these abandoned tunnels that are historically preserved is the Churchill Tunnel in Virginia, located a bit off the city liner of Richmond, Virginia, the state's capital. Now, individuals have known this tunnel for many things. However, one thing that was known about this tunnel was that it was plagued with the shadows of death at the very start of its existence. It was around the 1870s when the American Civil War had ended a few years prior between the Confederates and the Americans, marking a 5-year-long period of war, and the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad was making expansions into the city, specifically Richmond, Virginia, which was their target. During one of those very expansions into the city, the railroad was looking for a way to extend their track mileage a few miles south of Richmond into the city of Newport News, Virginia, where the coal Pierce owned under Collins P. Huntington's. This very expansion would create connections for the city area and bring in logical ways of exporting goods of coal. This will also expand into the former lines of the Virginia Central Railroad, which had a station in the downtown area section and overall more mileage under the Flint subdivision. However, one key object was in the way in the destruction of any of those expansions any possible, that being a giant hill in the Churchill area, which was built on thousands of houses, making it a neighborhood for thousands of people living there. However, still determined to make it happen, the Chesapeake and Ohio commissioned an expansion project in 1871 to allow a 4,000-mile tunnel to be constructed under the streets of the Churchill neighborhood. The tunnel project will seek to terminate the rail line running west of 17th Street and start digging the tunnel at 18th Street and ending at around 31st Street, which was exactly right under Libby Terrace Park, marking the end of its construction, at a cost of nearly $1.2 million. The project went into full approval by the railroad, and the construction process began, extending underneath the city. All was going to plan for its construction, except for one key problem. You see, at the time this tunnel was under construction, the mountainous terrain that they were digging through were layers of limestone enriched with blue marl clay shrink soils. The only difference between these materials and layers of bedrock is that the materials of bedrock stay stable when being constructed. something that proved helpful when the CNO made their western connected tunnels. However, the problem when constructing a tunnel under layers of clay and limestone is that the mixture of both, mostly being under the Myuu clay, is that the shift becomes unstable when being exposed to watery elements or soft moisture from the weather, most notably when it's affected by rainfall. And when the clay and the other geographical materials become unstable, it could potentially collapse under the intense movement or weight. This played a role in tunnel's construction, for most notably being problematic, as the further the workers dig to complete the tunnel, the shift and movement from the clay and limestone would often make an interference, causing rocks to fall, and sometimes even dangerous cave-ins within the tunnel that most often proved to be very deadly. As the construction went on, the cave-ins from large portions of the tunnel would reportedly kill 10 workers before being completed. Streets and masses of land would also react around the area of the construction by the formation or nearly creating mass sinkholes. However, in one accident during its dangerous construction, the house of a minister had been consumed by the soil, folded underneath, breaking a major gas line and causing leaks in the process. And in another event, a substance event caused several houses plummeting into the depths of the tunnel below, which kind of adds to the tunnel's infamous safety record. But despite this, construction continued on, and the project eventually wrapped up in 1872. And on December 11th, 1873, the very first Chesty train, that being CNO Locomotive Number 2, passed through the tunnel, marked its inauguration, and its opening to the public in transportation of Virginia. The tunnel was also marked as one of the longest tunnels in American history. But dreadfully, no one praised it. This was all due to the fact of its interior and building infrastructure that raised concerns for the government officials and individuals that are riding the trains going through it. Fearing disaster may happen if they were. So, to address public concerns, the railroad constructed a 3-mile-long viaduct, that being Riviera Trestle subdivision, and the Policeland subdivision trestle, starting from Hollywood Cemetery and joining the Policeland subdivision, with some additional and accessible connections thrown onto the table. This bridge would bypass the tunnel and create a more safe environment for trains and individuals, thus adding benefits for the railroads. Construction around the viaduct completed in 1901, marking its available uses to the public, and the tunnel fell dormant like a volcano, stopping all unusual activity that very same year. And for a while, looks like the railroad wouldn't have to worry about using the tunnel. At least, that's what they thought. It was almost 3.5 decades later, when entering 1925, when Richmond was flourishing with popularity. As for the CNO, well, they were in a crossfire, stress, and traffic. This was mostly due to the fact that their newly made bridge was put under the stress of handling thousands of trains that had been transported for years. And with all that amount of weight going by, it massively put a strain on the bridge. The railroad was going to need a new way to add more track mileage, otherwise everything was going to collapse into chaos. But why not reuse the poorly made tunnel? It doesn't waste any money. So that's what they did. And they have begun renovating the tunnel and restoring it to operable uses, with workmen inside doing the repairs. So on October 2nd, 1925, a workshop was organized by the railroad to re-establish the tunnel's interior infrastructure. The locomotive leading the train was Chesapeake, Ohio, number 231, a 4x4 heroes switching it. That local village had flat cars carrying 202 workers, both of them being laborers. Thomas J. Madison was the engineer, given it his first day on the job, and Benjamin F. Mosby was the fireman. They eventually set off for the tunnel. The weather was cold and rainy, and traveling under the intense weather. The only goal was that the workmen had in mind was to turn the tunnel to its optimal uses, whether it would be a routine fix if everything would be order. It took time, but the work train eventually arrived at the tunnel by eastern portal entrance. It felt like it had been wasted, washed up with water, and rotten with apple cores and decomposed flesh. But nevertheless, they still entered. They began their task with reinforcing the interior and upgrading it to modern standards. And unbeknownst to them, the tunnel had no intentions of being restored. Repairs and restorations around the tunnel began from the east portal all the way up into the middle. Unfortunately, as the train neared the western portal of the tunnel, nearing the end of the tunnel, at approximately 190 feet into the tunnel, is where something began to go seriously wrong. It was reported that around that area was where a brick fell to the floor of the ground, like a rock had fallen from the cliff. At first it was 1, then it increased to 5, then 10, then multiple. Death was closing in. Falling between like clay, train and work with the spring themselves treasures. Soil of the earth was everything. All of those workers I felt pushed deep down their back presence, swarming back, providing a clear access to escape. Those that were trapped reported to go nights as the light, the masses of bodies gaining way to escape, despite the slashing and all the problems just as the tunnel gave way. When the dust and smoke had cleared, tensions were in the air. Tragedy had arrived. The work train, along with the locomotive, were buried underneath the soils of the earth. The last person that was initially seen alive, walking out of the tunnel, was Fireman Mosby, who was badly scalded by the flames when the boiler ruptured. He eventually succumbed to his injuries hours later. As for the workmen, well, they were all hand-counted to see who escaped the tunnel. Reports claim that 6 workers were missing, but it was eventually reduced to 2, with them being identified as Richard Lewis and H. Smith. Train engineer Thomas Mosby was also missing. A few days were days of drag and recovery, and 6 were searched for the remains. However, as caving operations commenced, more cave-ins happened, slowing down the progress and efforts. On October 11, 1925, the body of Thomas Madison was recovered. He was killed instantly when the tunnel collapsed. As rescue efforts continued for days on, the efforts became more costly to operate. The further they digged, the more lives that could have been taken with them, or perhaps worse, even killed by the falling debris. So all the rescue efforts were called off for safety purposes, and the Virginia State Commission, or SCC for short, permanently sealed off both ends of the tunnel in 1926, leaving the remains of the labor workers and train buried inside. This wouldn't be the last we hear from this tunnel, though. While the tunnel was closed to the public, it never stopped its cave-ins that followed, as in 1962, a cave-in from the tunnel swallowed up a house, claiming a workers. Surveys were also made from the people who wanted to explore the tunnel, and in 2006, the Virginia Historical Society announced a project that would be reviving the bodies and the train for preservation. However, upon drilling a hole through the tunnel, the results were clear. It wouldn't be happening. This was mostly due to the fact that the sand and mostly water were surrounding the train, and if any recovery process went through, it would basically create a massive sinkhole or result in further collapses around the neighborhood, so any recovery plans were sidelined for safety reasons. The tunnel was also subject to an urban legend in 2001 relating to the Richmond vampire. That's a story for another video. And it's safe to say that nearly 100 years later, the train, along with the workmen, are still in the tunnel, decomposing, rotting with flesh, presumably sinking further into the earth, whatever you may call it. However, one thing is for sure, this ghost experience remain around the tunnel, still doing the very repairs that